Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's C-SPAN webinar on the complications and problems surrounding clinicals, internships, externships, and practicums. We will start at the top of the hour, as we always do. We want to welcome those individuals, some 140 of you that are already online with us today. We do have a very chock-full agenda and a wonderful lineup of individuals that will be participating with us. We will be starting right at 2 o'clock with Principal Deputy Undersecretary Diane Hour-Jones, who will be with us for an hour. We also have a great list of national accreditors, not that national and regional is necessarily in vogue anymore, but the accreditors, I think near and dear to many of your hearts. So welcome. We'll start in approximately 10 minutes. Michelle, are you having, so you got the board and everybody else meeting this week?
Yes, so because we have California folks, we start at 11 o'clock every day, which is 8 o'clock for them, and we pretty much go till 5 every day. It's been a lot.
Yeah, we're
it's only Tuesday.
And it's only Tuesday, yeah. C-SPAN, we've got our board meeting. We were obviously going to meet together, but with COVID, we're doing it via virtual as well, and that's on Friday. And so I've got these stacked up between now and then, a couple with FAME, a couple with C-SPAN, and then the guidance and the like as we await.
Yeah.
Number more of individuals continuing to join in. Welcome as those of you who are joining us for today's C-SPAN CARES Act webinar. We will get started right at 2 o'clock. I'll remind you of the do's and don'ts here in just another few minutes. As you can already see, we have some of our esteemed panelists joined with us already, and we are looking forward to presenting to you here in just another 7 to 8 minutes. Gary, have you joined us? Well, I see Gary as John signed in, so, and I see his microphone's on. So hopefully, Gary, you can hear me, and I welcome you to the group of panelists. You have India as well as Judy and Michelle with you thus far, and I'm sure the other attendees will be coming in shortly, along with Diane Hour-Jones and some of the other individuals that are on the panel. We have about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. Again, welcome to those of you in the morning or the afternoon, depending on if you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, or in the middle of our wonderful country. We will be starting here in approximately 5 to 6 minutes. A couple of the normal reminders with regard to today's CARES Act webinar. We are recording this presentation, as we are with all of the CARES Act presentations that we do. You have the ability to review those at your leisure in the future by going directly to the C-SPEN website, where each of these is cataloged, along with not only the audio presentation, but access to the slides. If you cannot pull down the slides and would like those for today's presentation, normally you can just go through and listen and pull them down, but if you need them, be sure to just ask Jerry and I, and we'll share those to you, to send those and forward those along to you. We also, after each one of these presentations, take and compile all of the questions that have been asked and our efforts to answer them, whether it be by the panelists on the call or in responses to questions we don't have the answers to afterwards. I can assure you with today's presentation, there'll be a number of questions that are an open dialogue where we may not have the questions, but certainly providing them and sharing them with the Deputy Assistant, Principal Deputy Undersecretary, as well as our esteemed panel of accreditors will be worthwhile. We'll start in just a few minutes. Reminder that the Q&A is on either the right-hand side or the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how your system is structured. We do offer the opportunity for Q&A, and we will be going through a number of those today with all of the collective presenters. We look forward to working with you on this presentation here in about another 5 minutes. So welcome. Gary, Dr. Puckett, can you hear me? Can we just test your microphone? I see you listed. Dr. McComas, welcome. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Good afternoon, all. Nice to see everyone. I didn't get dressed up like the rest of you.
You look sharp. You got your hair cut, though. How did you get that done? I haven't been able to do that in weeks, months.
No, I guess I haven't had a haircut actually in like 2 months. The older you get, the slower it grows, I think. It just grows everywhere else.
It looks sharp. Well, it is right at 2 o'clock, so I do want to start our presentation. Dr. Jones, Howard Jones is with us, as well as many of our esteemed panelists. So I do want to first begin by thanking all of you all for joining us, both the over 500, or close to 500, 478 registrants that are with us on today's call, as well as our esteemed group of presenters today. A couple of quick housekeeping reminders. This is being audio taped and videoed, and we do have the handout of the PowerPoint presentation, all of which you should be able to download at C-SPAN after we're done. It takes a little while for it to load up, but not long, and then you'll have access to all of the information. The principal deputy undersecretary has about an hour, so what we're going to do is go through a couple of things relatively quickly to provide her with the opportunity to present to us, as well as then our esteemed panelist of accreditors, and then open it up for Q&A after both of their sets of presentations. So without further ado, first we have Diane Howard-Jones, the Principal Deputy Undersecretary, who I think many of you are aware of is an individual who has a great deal of background and knowledge, both from an educator as well as from her positions up on Capitol Hill and within the prior Bush administration and the current Trump administration. She has a great deal of background and focus on issues related to allied health, having been a individual with a molecular biology background and a number of other things that she's done, including getting her certification as a nurse and a physical therapist under massage therapy. So she's well-rounded in a number of respects. She'll be speaking with us momentarily. We also have an accreditation panelist that includes India Tibbs from ABHES, Judy Hendrickson from ASSET, Michael McComas from ACICS, Gary Puckett from COE, and Dr. Anthony Mirando, as well as Ms. Michelle Edwards from ACICS and Dr. Anthony Mirando from NACIS. What we're going to cover today in very brief fashion is allow me to do a very quick overview and then turn it over to our keynote speaker, Dr. Howard-Jones, and then to the panelist of accreditors so that you can hear from them their perspectives to open up this dialogue, with the focus being on the challenges that we're all facing around issues in all sorts of disciplines as it relates to clinicals, internships, externships, and practicums. So I'm going to go over very quickly. What has brought us all together is the CARES Act and unfortunately the novel coronavirus pandemic and the implications that has brought not only to our friends and families in terms of health and healthcare providing, our frontline individuals across this nation that are trying to help all of those individuals in the pandemic, but it's brought a number of challenges to us as individuals involved in higher education and the delivery of that higher education. So too, as it brought many, many challenges to the individuals who were providing that education too. The government, through the CARES Act, attempted to do one of several pieces of legislation that they've put forward to try and help mitigate the implications of the coronavirus. To the first two pieces of legislation focused more predominantly on true healthcare frontline individuals and efforts to develop support and assistance for the economy and for health providers on the front lines of those issues with regard to the COVID virus. In the third of what has now been four pieces of legislation, we saw $2.2 trillion in funds put forward by Congress. A considerable amount of those funds and guidance contained in that act focused on higher education policy, not only from a policy perspective, but from directed funding in the form of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds as part of the Education Stabilization Funds under the CARES Act. We also know and have talked about in other webinars the Paycheck Protection Program, which again focused on ways to try and maintain stability within our economy by providing support to all of our small businesses, including individual small businesses that make up and are part of the private for-profit educational industry. Those funds, as well as a subsequent fourth bill with additional funds, have all been enacted and passed. The one most relevant to this conversation being the third, which included the CARES Act provisions that we're going to talk about today. Very briefly, there are a number of challenges. We all know that since the pandemic and since the onset of it, that there have been challenges for all three portions of the triad. I hope that you can get a little bit of the fun out of the triangle there, and the recognition that none of this is easy, and that while we certainly are aware that you as institutions and in the delivery of your academic programs in all disciplines are having issues in trying to keep students engaged and do the transition that was necessary to move from bricks and mortar or hybrid programs to fully online programs, that for many of our programs that the tactical or the hands-on or the various disciplines themselves require a great deal of time and effort in ways that are hard to accomplish, or in some instances are virtually right now impossible to accomplish, because the placements that you would be looking for and the ways in which the interaction of that education with true experiential learning are inhibited. One of the things Diane said to me when she agreed to do this was that she doesn't have all the answers, nor do I believe our esteemed panel of accreditors have all the answers either. I don't think any of us do, but what we wanted to do with C-SPEN today was to provide you with an opportunity to at least once again look at and discuss as a group and a community, as C-SPEN always tries to do, a number of those issues. Certainly, we are experiencing experiential learning disruptions in a number of our professions, whether that be allied health, whether that be auto diesel mechanics or the true trade skills, auto diesel mechanics or avionics, beauty and wellness, whether that be through massage therapy or any of the others, esthetician, cosmetology, and also in the multimedias. None of these are without problems or complications as a result of the inability for the students enrolled in those programs to have access to and the ability to apply their knowledge in the various ways in which these disciplines require. That causes issues and concerns with licensing and certification requirements. I pulled this down just to remind us, this is actually from our friends at CHIA. It's just a brief list of the 54 programmatic accreditors that they have listed on their website. Many of these accreditors working with the states, the accreditors, and the disciplines that they're in to ensure, once again, the integrity of the education, the quality of education, and the requisites needed for completion that are now being stymied by the current issues that we all face. And certainly in that, last but not least, the problems and challenges that arise from the states themselves. We have different states with different leadership, all providing different guidance on when reopening will take place. This is literally from yesterday, showing a graphic depiction of the fact that as we all try and make it through this process, we're likely to see these changes have to take place at different timelines for different environments. Things happening in New York certainly are likely to be at a slower pace in many instances than many of the states you see here, Georgia, Florida, and others that are either have already opened or, as you see in the light yellow, are contemplating reopening in the not too distant future. All of these challenges weigh on your ability to provide education and the student's ability to complete that education. So what we wanted to do was, given those concerns, bring everyone together at least for an hour to an hour and a half and share a little bit of empathy and also a little bit of frustration, probably very likely, around what we're all coping with and having to deal with on behalf of education and our students and their ability for them to complete their education. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our keynote speaker, Diane Auer-Jones from the Department of Education. Hi, Diane. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that she has a very tight window, so what we'd like to do is provide her all the time she'd like to speak, then a few minutes with each of our panelists from the accreditors, and then open it up to questions, some from us and then some from you, our group of over 488 right now participants and attendees on today's webinar. So with that, Diane, thank you very much on behalf of C-SPEN, on behalf of all the accreditors, all of the institutions and the communities that I know you work so hard to protect and provide for. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much. So first I want to express my gratitude. You know, when we put the guidance out, I guess it was on March 17th that it finally was issued. You know, we think of it as our March 13th guidance because that was the date of the national emergency. When we made the decision to put the guidance out to give more flexibility for distance learning, you know, there were lots of questions about what would happen. How would institutions respond? Would they respond? And so it was a bit of an experiment. And so I want to express my gratitude because what we saw was at the minute that we put the guidance out to create flexibility, we saw people just jumping in and taking it. And we saw institutions working very quickly to figure out how to move students to an online environment. And we saw accreditors being equally responsive to come up quickly with policies and protocols that would allow schools to move to the online environment. And also that would allow accreditors to continue their work through virtual site visits if they chose to do that. So, you know, we've seen the best of higher ed. We've seen just an incredible amount of dedication to students and creativity. And I mean, frankly, you know, I've been at this a long time. I've been in higher ed for over 30 years, and never have I witnessed such a full and collaborative response to just doing what we needed to do to serve students. So I congratulate you, and I thank you for the quick action you've taken. I think all of us, when we started this in March, hoped that we would be using this guidance to get us through to the end of the spring term. Well, I think originally we hoped it would get us through spring break, and then it became more clear that we hoped it would get us through the spring term. And now we're getting questions that make it clear that people are looking at, you know, the summer and the fall term. So we do have guidance that will come out hopefully sometime soon this week, hopefully early this week, but if not by the end of the week, to look at some of the deadlines and timelines. You know, when we put our guidance out in March, we really were looking at a short-term problem that I think we all have come to understand in some states could end up being a longer-term challenge. So we are working with schools. We're trying to provide guidance to schools as they need it, and certainly to accreditors as well. We know that, look, I've been at this long enough to know that everybody needs things in writing. You need guidance to point to, and we want you to have flexibility to do what you need to do, but we also understand the need to protect, so that 4 years from now, when people have forgotten about this, people don't look at practices and say, well, why did you do that? Or how did you do that? So we're trying to, you know, balance between, we don't want to be overly prescriptive, but we also know that you need certain things in writing to protect yourself. So we're trying to thread that needle like all of the rest of you. I think, you know, like many of you, I think the question we don't have an answer to, and it's probably less our regs and much more a licensure issue, but one that we're still interested in, is, you know, so what do we do? It was one thing to think about getting through a term where students were moving to simulators for their clinicals, for their hands-on learning, for their experiential learning. I think everybody thought, well, you know, we'll find a way to compensate. But as we look to, perhaps for some institutions, through the summer and maybe even through the fall term, because we are hearing some schools say that they will remain online through the end of the fall term. Not a lot, but we're hearing some. That looks very different, because then you're talking about entire cohorts of students that perhaps can't complete their program. You know, we can't really afford to go to a whole year without getting new nurses, new nursing assistants, new truck drivers. So there becomes a crisis, a national crisis, in terms of, you know, preparing people to do the jobs we need them to do, that they want to do, that they've put their lives on hold to learn how to do. So I'm really interested in hearing people's thoughts through this conversation and others about, you know, so what do we do? What is the right way to move forward, in particular with the kinds of programs that require, or have in the past required, hands-on learning? And, you know, it could be that we each have to work within the communities in which our students will enter. So, for example, if you have a nursing program, you know, do we need to work with hospitals and have, you know, preceptorship-like programs, right? Are there transition programs that the employers are going to have to realize they have to provide? So, for example, you know, if people can't do their student teaching, do we not let them complete their college education, or do we let them complete doing other activities, but then work with schools to understand that in the first year, you probably need to partner this person up with another teacher? You know, I've worked as a nursing assistant. I know working in a hospital can be challenging, but you know, perhaps as we move people into allied health professions, hospitals and doctors' offices are going to have to realize that some of the hands-on work that would have been done in the classroom now needs to be done on the job. which frankly, in many ways, takes some of our programs full circle back to the way they were 100 years ago, where, you know, a significant portion of it was apprenticeship, where the large majority of hands-on learning was done on the job while being employed under the guidance of an employer. So I think that there's going to have to be some combination of, you know, where we can have simulation as a replacement activity. That's great. Where we can't, there may be some programs where we just literally say we have to put students on a leave of absence. We can't continue to offer this program. And then maybe there's a third option where there are transition programs that employers sponsor, you know, understanding that people are not going to come out of college with the same hands-on experience, and they're going to need more mentorship in the workplace. So, you know, again, I think it's more of an accreditation issue and a licensure issue than it is a return to Title IV or a regulatory issue. But as a member of the triad, you know, we're all in it together, and I think together we all want to do what's right for students. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, hearing, you know, are there things you need from the department? Are there additional flexibilities? And then certainly we've been working really hard to get the CARES funding out and to get guidance out to support that funding. And so, you know, I'm happy to answer questions that any of you might have about the CARES Act funding programs or the regulatory waivers that come through the CARES Act. And again, we hope to have more guidance coming out this week to provide a little more explanation on some of the waivers, like return to Title IV and federal work study, et cetera. So I'll stop there and turn it back to you, but I'm happy to answer, you know, whatever questions come my way.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to turn it over to the panelists real briefly for some of their remarks, because we did want to have that collaboration as well as with the institutions that are part of their communities. Michelle, I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair and allow you to go first. So Michelle, if you want to start, then I'll go to Judy and then India. Sorry, Michael, but my chivalry from where I grew up in South Carolina, ladies first, so you get to go last. So Michelle, if you can go first, and then we'll go through the rest of the esteemed group of panelists. Michelle?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting us to be here. I'm excited to kind of collaborate with everyone. I know the national accreditors have been having lots of conversations so that we're all on the same page with what each of us is doing. And so collaborating with C-SPAN and having Diane on here as well is exciting. You know, ACICS has continued to do pretty much what everyone else is. We're looking for the guidance received from the department and doing our very best to interpret that and pass that along to our members. We have, just like everyone else has, set up a short-term temporary change in modality. We've received, out of our 90 institutions, we've received 73 of those for those that were already not offering some type of distance education. And so we continue to process those as quickly as possible. We also are looking at processing as quickly as we can distance education on a permanent basis, that folks are looking that either that it will extend past the June 1st date, or they're looking that they like the distance ed modality and want to work on that. So we struggle a little bit right now, and I think that's part of the conversation we'll have with the accreditors later this week is the states working quickly enough to approve distance education applications so that the accreditors can also look at that. So that's part of the struggle. Obviously, as far as simulations and externships, internships, our institutions are, you know, being very creative in how they're doing that. They're working with publishers, anybody that is offering types of circumstances where they can complete those. Certainly the fear that this could go into the fall is something that all of us are looking at. And so I think we're probably excited to have all of the folks on this call today to get some feedback from the different member institutions. And so I'll leave it with that and move it to India.
Michelle, thank you. India, you said second was your sweet spot, so second.
All right. Well, thank you. First and foremost, I just want to thank you, Tom, for inviting me to participate on today's panel. When you invited me to talk about external learning requirements, I thought, well, that has become pretty much my daily task to address these kinds of questions. So, I mean, as you can imagine, ABHES, as a specialized institutional and specialized programmatic accrediting agency for allied health programs, our schools really started to feel the impact of the pandemic almost immediately as clinics and hospitals temporarily suspended student participation, which really started, I want to say, back in February, where there was initial concern about the PPE shortages, which actually continues to be a concern even now in terms of schools and states reopening, and even for schools thinking about on-site labs where they do need that the PPE equipment. So many schools have contacted ABHES specifically about their options to accommodate current students in need of completing their required clinical experiences in order to graduate. ABHES has received lots of inquiries about why we are not responding the exact way that other national accreditors or specialized programmatic accrediting agencies are. And I understand their frustration, but, you know, simply put, I mean, ABHES just has a different charge than other accreditors. In that we are in the allied health field, and we have to think about all the different programs that we accredit and approve across all of our institutions, and there's such a wide variety of those programs. And so it was really important for us to maintain a proper balance and the need for flexibility depending on the professional field and really the community need for those services. So, you know, for example, I think that, you know, at ABHES, we thought there was definitely more flexibility needed for those fields that are on the front line, the EMT, paramedic, the nurses, the respiratory therapists that are on the front line and needing that flexibility and being able to provide that. It was important for us to try to keep up as best we could with the governors and the changing state regulations, looking at trends such as, you know, in New York and other hotspots where students were really placed on leave of absence because the school could not provide the clinical experience necessary. But there were hospitals and clinics hiring these students who had not yet completed their program. So, you know, that was something we were seeing. And so a lot of schools were asking, you know, what is ABHES's position in terms of if these students returning and the ability to kind of apply some of that real work experience that they had been receiving, you know, in the hospitals and clinics towards completion of that external clinical component of the program. Lots of schools have started, as you can imagine, simulation and other approaches for students. I will tell you, it's not been ABHES's process to allow for simulation in our programs. As you can imagine, this is, you know, a lot of our programs have that required patient setting where, you know, students go into the hospital, to the clinics, and work in that patient-to-patient, student-to-patient exposure, which is kind of hard to replicate in a simulated environment. But I understand the need that simulation, and there are, I think a lot of schools have been challenged and probably have done a pretty nice job in terms of finding those right experiences that lend itself to simulation. And so, you know, the commission will be looking at this. They'll be considering these things, but it's going to really depend on the documentation. And so, you know, I know schools are desperate to get ABHES's approval to confirm compliance with these alternative methods, but my best advice continues to be that it's really relying on the documentation that they're maintaining. I mean, the burden really remains on the institution to document that they have qualified program personnel ensuring that students demonstrate competencies for entry-level employment as a basis for completion. The commission is likely to be persuaded by institutions that are able to document its efforts made to safeguard students, to maintain the integrity of the educational process, and, again, ensure that students demonstrate required competencies for entry-level employment. So I think we're all struggling in this, and I know our schools are desperately looking and waiting to see if the department is going to revise that June 1 deadline. We're all looking at that, and I know that a lot of schools also have questions about financial aid and other funding implications for the students that are placed on leave of absence. So.
Judy, I'm going to turn it over to you next.
Okay. So COVID-19 certainly presents enormous, unprecedented challenges at the micro and the macro level, challenges to individuals, institutions, and the economy. COVID-19 is forcing all of us to think outside the box, to be agile, flexible, and innovative. And this might be the long-term benefit of COVID-19. Asset is working with its institutions to try to assist by providing the temporary flexibilities consistent with the department and also with SCVP. This includes temporary flexibilities relative to externships, internships, and labs. So for externships, students have, it is always the student's option, but students have the option of completing a rescheduled externship or internship, knowing that this may mean a leave of absence, or completing a capstone course that is comparable in length with the externship, unless it's prohibited by any applicable licensing board or any other approval or certifying authorities. In the lab, students are given 3 options, and again, it's their choice. So one is to complete a rescheduled labs, and again, that may require a leave of absence. To complete simulated labs that have to be synchronous, they have to provide hands-on practice using video conferencing, and they have to assess student skill performance during the lab time. Again, this is only if it's permissible by the approval agencies. And then last is the option of having didactic classes in lieu of the labs. This is only applicable and possible if the institution agrees to provide scheduled makeup labs later on for students to be able to develop their hands-on skills. Because 80% of our institutions are offering distance learning, many of them for the first time, Asset has been hosting a series of 90-minute free webinars on interactive distance learning. So it's in technology, learning management systems, online assessment, interaction and engagement of students, and student orientations. It's also webinars on the IDL program approval process for those that want to continue after June 1st with IDL, and there's a lot of interest in that area. Our institutions are really looking forward to additional guidance from the department on satisfactory academic progress, on refunds and financial reporting requirements. I know that was indicated in an early notification. I just want to share a few of the remarks that were in the chats during some of our webinars to get a sense of what institutions are doing. So in the labs, they're doing simulations, they're doing demonstrations, they're doing sim charts, they're doing Miller Open Book, case studies in Moodle, interactive graphics, electude for auto mechanics, labs in the instructor's garage. That was a favorite. Students are dissecting hams and chicken breasts. They are using virtual labs. They're using troubleshooting and diagnostic simulations. The techniques that they're using, or the platforms, I should say technologies or platforms, are Zoom, Canvas, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, Moodle, Google Classrooms. Students are using ebooks, Kindles, iPads, cell phones. In order to engage students and have interactivity, their breakout groups, polling, chats, turning in homework, lots of questions, taping sessions, and calling and emailing. And they all say communication, communication, communication. So what has the students' responses been? Students love the web-based interaction. Well, those that are millenniums. Older students have more challenges. Students love the way we keep in touch. Some are dropping out, but much lower than anticipated. Better than we thought. It's going way better, going much better than expected. Attendance is greatly improved. We're towards the end of the program, so we're sticking with it. Better than expected. Attendance is wonderful. Yes, attendance is improved. Better than we thought. Students are so happy to be back in class. So what is the glue that all of them say keeps the students retained? Faculty, faculty, faculty. So amongst all the negative, there are also some positives that are coming out of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary, are you with us? I think you're there via phone. Gary, are you there? And then Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you for the closing, the wrap up after Gary. Gary, next.
Yes, yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I sure can, sir. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
I'm sorry, I don't know what the issue is with the with the video, but one good thing about being in the middle of a panel or near the end of the panel, that most everything you were going to say has already been said, but I'll have just a few points to make. You know, I've noticed that there are two words that we hear more than we've ever heard before, and one of them is two words: "Can you hear me?" And the other one is unprecedented. Those are two things we hear. But and I too appreciate the opportunity to participate. And I sort of summarized, you know, from what I've understood, talking to schools, commissioners, other accreditors. I sort of see we have a general term for externships, internships, and clinicals, and we call it work-based education. And it seems to me there's about 4 categories of that right now, and many of them are doing simulated activities. Many, which I heard this morning for the first time, have been able to do telemedicine. I'm not sure exactly how that works in the health field. They're actually doing the work-based part by telemedicine. Also, some are actually on the job. And I guess the availability of clinicals and interns and externships is related to the seriousness of the epidemic and the location. So it's like everything else. In some areas you can do activities, in some areas you can't. And then unfortunately, there are some that are just waiting, and they're waiting on an innovative answer. That's the one that bothers me, is the ones that there are no plans for, but I'm sure that we will work it out. You know, this whole thing has to be done in sort of dispensations. You don't know what to do from month to month, and you learn as you go. I think the common denominator that all of us have for many of the experience-related sections of programs is, what will a state allow? You know, in some cases, a state won't allow certain types of activities. So we do appreciate the department, the guidance that we've gotten from the department and the extensions. We've made a lot of extensions. So I know our time is, I could go on, but I believe that would be what I would say at this point. And thank you for the opportunity.
Dr. Puckett, thank you very much. Mr. McComas, you are up next, and there you go, back on screen. And then Dr. Mirando, Tony, you're last. So Michael, if you could go, that'd be great. Thank you very much once again for joining us.
Well, of course. Well, I was feeling like my background was a little bit bland as I'm looking out across the span here, so I thought I would add a little bit of a messaging while I'm here. And my kids helped out with creating some signs there for everyone. So, you know, look, hey, I'm in even better position than Gary. You know, I think I really can't add anything than what's already been said. So I'm not going to try and do that. You know, I'll just say, you know, what everybody else said, you can apply that pretty much to our experience here as well. So I want to take my brief couple of minutes here and talk about how I don't want this to go to waste. That this has been really hard, and it's what you know, myself and our staff have been referring to as a black swan event. You know, something that happens that's unexpected but changes things unexpectedly beyond that. And so, and going back to some of Diane's comments about how programs are evolving and changing, and the way that Judy mentioned the faculty are coming together, I think it's opened up a lot of perspective and a lot of folks' eyes to say, maybe there is some alternative here. And so we really, you know, we're in the same boat. We got a ton of, you know, institutions that have said, hey, we did this temporary thing. And then, you know, following up with them, they're kind of thinking, that's not so bad. Maybe we should keep doing that. And that's fine. And that's one approach. But I'm thinking about also what Diane said about, you know, things like apprenticeships, and how really that was the form of delivering vocational education for years and years and years before funding and federal intervention became an opportunity. And so let's not let federal intervention prevent us from using a tried and true tactic. And the issue there becomes really, you know, well, then does it qualify for federal financial aid? And you know, then are we really doing a disservice to those students who are only doing 300 hours in a school and 300 hours or 400 hours in an apprenticeship, but that's highly regulated or highly monitored and highly assessed? Why is that not, you know, as much of an opportunity? So maybe, you know, what I'm hoping is that we think about and rethink. In some ways, innovation isn't always just about technology and what, you know, WebExes and Zoom calls and all that other stuff. Sometimes innovation is just going backwards and looking at some of the things that we did really successfully before and getting back to some roots. And that is, in terms of vocational education, you know, I always say that, you know, vocational education and learning, you know, as you go and on site is one of the oldest things out there. Like, you know, if you're out in the plains and you didn't know how to make a fire 20,000 years ago, you weren't going to survive, and then you had to pass that skill on to somebody else. And that's how we've been teaching people to do things for millennia. So let's not forget the importance of that tradition, and really think about that as we go forward. You know, we've just tried to use the two primary lodestars as we think about all this stuff, because Tom, I don't have any answers to any of this. I don't think anybody really does. I mean, this just kind of caught everybody. But student success, keeping that at the center of the decision-making paradigm is what we're trying to do, and being guided by the principle of flexible and creative, and that you know, not at the expense of quality. To India's point, we can't do everything that everybody wants us to do, but I don't know what the department's going to do about LOA, but I know that our agency is not going to, penalize students if they go beyond X number of days in an LOA. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. So keeping students at the center of that kind of paradigm and that thinking is how we're trying to go forward. And it's just going to be case by case, situation by situation, scenario by scenario. So we're trying to assuage some of the anxiety by just saying, yes, there are rules and there are standards, but there's also the human element that goes into kind of the subjective analysis that, as long as you're doing your best and you're trying and you're not taking advantage of students and you're trying to help them and you can document it and show it to the best of your ability and all those other things, then we're probably going to say, okay, let's again, do this together, and figure out some stuff as we go. But let's not waste it either. And let's put some of this creativity to good use and think about this in terms of not just if this happens again, but hey, maybe there's going to be some good stuff that comes out of this. And look, I'll just say, we're looking at doing virtual visits right now. Now, I am an old school accreditor. I never thought I would say that, but 25 years in, the onset evaluation to me is sacrosanct, right? It just, the feel of it, what you learn in the first 5 minutes of even being there. But hey, we're going to pilot it anyway, just because, maybe we'll learn some stuff that we hadn't thought about before. And let's not close off opportunities. And in the short term, we might, be able to alleviate some of the pressure that's building. We've canceled 65 onset evaluations. We got to make that up somehow. That doesn't just happen. So that pressure needs some relief. But then we might learn some good tips to integrate, those kinds of practices. And so again, open-mindedness, flexibility and creativity are things that we're trying to be really cognizant of and think about. So hopefully our members hear that. Hopefully the department sees that as a positive thing. We're not trying to let anybody off the hook, but we're also not trying to do anything that harms students along the way either. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tony.
Thank you, Michael. Tony, last but not least on this particular portion of the call.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Diane, for agreeing to get on the call here with us. We greatly appreciate all your help and your guidance, and we look forward to further guidance as we continue through this whole COVID-19 process. But being the last, it's always, a hard thing to do. Many of my colleagues have pretty much expressed a lot of the concerns that we're all facing. Unlike my colleagues, we are also facing a lot of challenges with 1,300 plus schools. It is, you can imagine the sheer numbers of things that we process adds to our stress. Just as a background, most of our schools are beauty and wellness. And so, that entails, cosmetology, barbering, aesthetics, massage therapy. And so our schools don't really have clinicals and internships and externships off-site. So as you can imagine, as the COVID-19 happened and the stay-at-home orders by our governors took hold, majority of our schools have now closed, and that includes their student clinics. And so, many of the schools, and we've had quite a bit, went from having about 40 schools that had distance ed approved by us to having over 900 applications for this temporary distance ed. And all of our schools are clock hours. They, tried quickly, and with our flexibility and with the department's flexibility, we handled it. We got out all our approvals, and schools are moving forward. But with respect to our schools, they have a big part of their programs are theory, but like a lot of hands-on type programs, there's a big component of it that is also practical at the school. Well, the schools are closed, so a lot of states are struggling with how do we go about allowing our schools, whether it be through simulation or whether it's through, face-to-face on FaceTime or any video type of interaction, can we effectively and adapt to providing a practical experience for our students and give them the experience they really need. But it goes beyond that even with our schools. And this is the part that I'm hoping that maybe Diane can help us with. NACAS had, like I said, only about 40 schools that wanted to do distance ed because many of the states didn't allow for it. But with this COVID-19, many of the states' licensing boards with respect to cosmetology and barbering, they stepped up to the plate and are, allowed for distance ed when there was none, allowed for distance ed where they did have some. They've increased the number of hours they allowed, and there are some states that are even allowing some practical work. Here's the challenge that we had, and again, hoping for some help here, is that NACAS, under the Code of Federal Regulation, only didn't apply for distance ed in its scope, and so we are allowed to do up to 50% of any approval of a program. Well, now all of a sudden we're challenged with this temporary distance ed, and we're challenged with so many of the boards allowing for schools to now participate in distance education, even within some of the practical pieces of it. They're going, or if this goes beyond June 1st, we'll go beyond the 50% that we're allowed. And so we're hoping that in the future, the department will, provide some of the other agencies like NACAS, who never had a need for more than 50% of a distance ed piece of a program, to waive that restriction during this temporary distance ed period. And we also have other concerns, and again, I'm hoping that the update that you all give out by the end of the week, that you will be addressing some of the other areas, specifically in the area of the transition period, going from totally distance ed to, having some allowed in the school based on what their governors or their health boards are allowing them to do, with social distancing. And so that transition period as well. And there are a few others, but hopefully we'll hear some more about that in your updates. I want to thank you, Diane, for giving us this opportunity to hear from you. We are in this all together. And as many of my colleagues said, I hope that we learn something from this, and something that we can share amongst one another and actually utilize in the future.
Tony, thank you. Diane, I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask 2 or 3 questions that, quite honestly, are coming, because I've asked them several times before, and you've heard several of them yet again today. To the degree possible, if I don't get off of this call, at least without asking the questions about leave of absences and whether or not leave of absences, those students are eligible for the HERF funds, I might not be able to talk to anybody else because I won't be around. The June 1st deadline looming, as you've heard multiple times, is something that the community, all communities, I think, are very much focused on right now. And in the broader context, as Tony talked about and others have talked about, whether it's clock hours or credit hours, you guys have given a considerable amount of flexibility in the near term, not just with the deadline, but also with the way in which institutions and accreditors and it can comprise the educational programs and the tracking in some respects. Can you try and answer those 3 questions? What about LOAs for individuals that are put on LOAs not by their choice or the choice of the institution? Are they eligible for HERF funds?
So if the student was enrolled at the time that the national emergency was declared, which was March 13th, for some schools, even if it was starting on March 1st, right? So we saw starting on March 1st, we started to see changes, but most of them took place after March 13th, frankly, when people came back from spring break, for schools that had spring break. So if somebody was enrolled and it is a consequence of the virus that they are on a leave of absence because the program couldn't continue or they couldn't continue, yes, they would be eligible. If it's somebody who had taken a leave of absence at the, in December and they were not enrolled and participating at the time of the national emergency, then no, they wouldn't be eligible. So it's one of those, it depends, but clearly if they were enrolled and their disruption is because of the coronavirus, then yes, they are eligible for those funds because they're still considered one of your students. It's just that this was how the disruption impacted them. So yes, they would be. We're well aware that we need to go beyond the June 1st date, and you will see in our guidance coming out that we have gone well beyond June 1st. We know that's an issue. Our guidance does include information about SAP, return to Title IV, financial responsibility. So those things are all in our guidance that's coming out. The timing was perfect. The comment period ended today for our distance education regs, and the timing was perfect. I haven't looked at all 150 comments, but I've looked at a number, and many of them really are informed by the experience that people are having right now. So I think the timing on that was good, and frankly, the comments were quite favorable. I think people are now seeing the benefit of distance, so I think that has been good. Let's see, I'm trying to go back and see the other, I took notes. Yes, apprenticeships are eligible for federal student aid. Again, it depends on their enrollment status, and a few didactic credits, then they might get, partial awards. But yes, there was a Dear Colleague letter, I think in 2015, that confirmed that apprentices are eligible. And we have our federal work study experiment launched to make it easier for students that are involved in internships, clinicals, whatever, even if they're part of a program, that they can get federal work study funds for that. And we are appealing to accreditors to work with us. We know some accreditors have said that students can't get paid for their externships and internships. We're asking for you to consult the list of schools participating in our experiment and perhaps think about waiving that. So for some of the students that have already gone to work, perhaps, that can be their federal work study experience, and also they can get credit. Students can get credit for what they have learned and done on a federal work study job, so they can double dip, so to speak. So those things are allowed. So I think those are the questions that I wrote down. Yes, we understand there's a transition period. Yes, we know that accreditors need more time. And one of the things that I don't have an answer for, but we're looking internally, is everybody will have done distance education by the time this is over. Every accreditor that we know of will have increased the number of distance learning institutions. And so we're currently looking at both our current regs and the new regs that are coming into effect to see, do we have the authority to acknowledge that and say, okay, it's now part of your recognition. And I don't have an answer to that, but we're looking to see, is there something we can do to recognize that you're already there? And so it might just be needing, some agencies to submit, a short form or some evidence. So we are looking to see if there's something that we can do to help agencies transition into having distance included as part of their recognition, moving forward. Because if you're doing it, you're doing it. And yes, we do understand that as we go beyond June 1st, some agencies will exceed the 50% rule, and that's why we have provided the waivers. We're fully aware that most agencies are now looking toward 100%, and that's why we put the waivers out. So hopefully that helps. I have just a couple more minutes. I have to jump off because I have to be on a Zoom call with the secretary. Those are calls I'm never late for, but I have just a couple more minutes if there are other questions that I can answer. But I'm sorry for having to rush off. I had planned to be here the whole time, but schedules are fluid these days.
I think you just hit on it. And before you hop off of the phone, Diane, I want to say on behalf of our entire community, thank you to you, thank you to the secretary, and candidly, thank you to all the people that I've had the opportunity to continue to work with under your leadership on the HEP side with regard to the HERF funding, and on the policy planning and innovation side that I know have been working hard on the guidance that you've alluded to. It is not lost on all of us how much had to be done by the department and the secretary in a short amount of time. And I offer sincere appreciation and congratulations to you all for the guidance that you were able to get out as quickly as you were, the opportunity to push forward on the student funds first, the institutional funds second under the HERF, and all the guidance that is forthcoming. One quick question with regard to the HERF side. We are seeing some lag right all of a sudden with regard to the approval process. Is there a reason for that? Is there something going on that they're missing? Many schools got their acceptance through the process, but are not seeing the acceptance and the acknowledgement of the award flipping to the ability under G5 to access the funds and get them to students. Why that's so important is because FSA has put out acknowledgements to students that they have access to those funds, so the schools are caught betwixt and between. Can you respond to that at all?
Yeah, so we are processing. I think we have now processed 80%. I think we've processed 5.3 billion of the emergency grants to students. So we're getting towards the end of those. We're just getting started on the institutional relief and others. Unfortunately, G5 itself moves at its own pace, and it is moving more slowly than we thought or hoped. We do think the pace has picked up. We have people who have been working through the weekend. Our HEP staff have been incredible. And as they've done more, it's gotten quicker. And we're also seeing the applications are coming in with fewer errors. So we think it's picking up and we're moving forward. But yeah, we think we really have hit the point where it's a 3-day turnaround, but G5 was not built for a quick turnaround. There were steps that we didn't even know had to be added. And so, but we do think it's getting quicker. And yeah, the HEP staff, the PPI staff, I mean, the staff at the department have been incredible. And many of them are, like many of you, doing this while raising kids and homeschooling and all the other things that they have to do. So, we've had our hiccups and we apologize for those, but by and large, I think, things are going along pretty well. So people should be seeing their funds. The funds should be available in G5. We're concerned that we've only heard from about 70% of the schools. That represents more than 80% of the money. So we think there are some small schools that maybe aren't aware that they have access to these funds. So please reach out to your members and make sure that they know. Some proprietary schools thought they were not included. They are included in the 90%, the A1 funds. They're not in the A2 or A3, but they are in the A1 bucket. So hopefully people will have their money. And then finally, the last thing is for schools that have submitted their certification and want to go ahead and make emergency grants to students, any emergency grant, a cash grant made to a student after on or after March 27th, the school can make the award and then reimburse itself. Now, I know not every school has the means to do that, but if a school does, the one way that a school can use the emergency grants to students to reimburse itself is if it has given cash grants to students anticipating that the funds are coming from us.
I see our time with you is up. Please say thank you to the secretary for us. Thank you to you very, very sincerely, very, very much. If you don't mind, I am going to take and clean up these questions and share some of them with you. We share a lot of them as you all instruct us through COVID-19 questions, but I'll share some of those with you so that as you and your team continue to work through this, you have the benefit of the discussions that took place today. From all of us, sincerely, thank you very, very much, Diane.
Yes.
Thanks to all of you. We'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
For those of you who will hang with us, there are some questions for the panelists. There are a couple of them that are specific to different accreditors and also more generic. A number of the generic questions that kept coming through, I hope you saw that I think we got some actual clarification on a couple of key issues. I know that that was the most clear information I've yet received on LOAs, both in terms of who is and isn't eligible, in terms of the department's thinking, the very clear indication that we don't know what the actual deadlines are, but they are going to go beyond June 1. And also recognition in a number of respects that because we're all now in the virtual environment of online education, a number of questions that I keep getting are, Dr. Mirando and the others in beauty and wellness, but across all sectors, how this is going to change and what additional flexibilities might be forthcoming with regard to either hybrid or online education, synchronous, asynchronous delivery, and some of the limits that currently exist on the portions of programs that can be provided in an online environment in tandem with another institution or at your institutions alone. I'll ask a couple of these other questions just for some of the panelists. Hold on a second. I had a couple of these broken down by different types of you all as panelists, so I was trying to get back to them. For nursing schools attempting to replace direct patient contact hours with simulations, do the panelists believe that most schools are conducting the simulation via distance as opposed to in-person simulations? If so, are the panelists finding that the state nursing boards are permitting this? Who wants to take a crack at that one?
So I'll take a crack at it. For nursing schools, I mean, we are really relying on the state boards of nursing in terms of what they are allowing for simulation. So we're really following their lead when it comes to simulation and these types of things.
Can we talk a little bit about privacy issues of students, especially when giving exams and asking them to turn on their cameras? If you could comment on what we need to cover in order to be compliant, that would be helpful. Judy, India, Michael, any of you want to? Obviously, I think that there are concerns about those type of integrity issues. Any comments?
I'll comment. So that when it comes to student assessments, there are the webcams, there are Canvas provides proctoring services, and Pearson VUE and so forth. When we've been doing the IDL webinars, and there's a lot of expertise and experience with doing IDL, we're often talking about having assessments be essentially open book. Just assume that it's an open book assessment and scramble the questions, but not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to use cameras.
One of the other things that I've heard and learned from some, go ahead, Michael.
I mean, I haven't heard that concern. I mean, I get it. You know, if a student has really any kind of privacy / technology concern with the format that is now being used during this period of time, and they don't want to do that, then, you know, again, that goes to Diane's, you know, comments about, you know, leave of absence. Maybe that's a better approach for that individual student who has a choice to say, either I don't feel comfortable with that technology, I didn't sign up for that technology, and you know, that puts obviously it puts them in a position to have to put their education on hold or to move forward with it. You know, flexibility of institutions and faculty. I mean, like, if you don't really need webcams, and this is, you know, different from Judy's point about, you know, integrity of the assessment and learning process. But otherwise, if you don't really need webcams, I'm not sure why it would absolutely be a necessity for a student to turn theirs on, unless, again, there's an issue to some concern that the institution has with regard to verifying identity. So again, I guess I would just, you know, encourage institutions to be open and flexible, and you know, this is really trying for a lot of folks, you know, pushing institutions well outside of comfort zones and boundaries. Then, you know, as Gary said, you know, pretty much on every Zoom call you have somebody saying, hey, can you hear me? Or, is this thing on? There's always somebody that's struggling with the technology somewhere. So, you just, try and deal with it, and just I would just say, don't set up really strict, restrictive rules that put students in such a position that they would have to make choices about turning on their webcam.
One of the things we heard on one of the previous C-SPAN webinars as well was a lot of institutions are taking to utilizing quick screenshots, the ability to scan things so you can actually see the student's work come back along with it. There was another thing that seemed to be a revelation for some of the institutions, was like, wow, to get it back from the student in real time, regardless of open book or not, but to see their work very quickly would at least show whether or not they're doing the work or completing the work. You can look at them obviously in online environments, but requiring that submission at the end of the testing period or the examination period was another thing that seemed to be an aha or epiphany moment for some of the people that were on some of the earlier webinars. We are an ABHES school. Is there any guidance on what to do about massage therapy programs that are hands-on? Is there any suggestion of what we can do to provide proof of competency since we cannot practice with social distancing?
Yeah, I think that's a struggle. That's a program that does require that hands-on experience. It's hard to do that virtually. We do have schools that offer massage therapy in a blended format. Obviously, they provide the lecture and that sort of thing online very easily, but many of them are placing students on leave of absence until they can have those students be able to come back into their facility to demonstrate competencies for the hands-on portion of the training.
Thank you for that. Any of you others care to share? I mean, you all have disciplines that have the tactic environments.
I would add, Tom, that what I see a lot of our schools are doing is they are rearranging the curriculum to offer as much of the didactic portion as they can, and trying to avoid placing students on that leave of absence to keep them engaged and to help with the retention process. So we're seeing that be a real positive in a lot of our programs.
This one came after Diane and Michael, after both of you talked about the fact that online and specifically, I think I heard not only is online, but competency-based education through apprenticeships and the like are these new things that we're experiencing out of necessity right now are part of what may become our future. A question that came up towards the end is, are the agencies willing to consider allowing schools to request of more of a long-term temporary approval for the types of modifications that we're now all challenged with, but learning from? Again, I think it's back to some of that innovation factor and some of the experiments that maybe we were not as prepared to or somewhat recalcitrant from participating in, that now it's all here. So I think that there are people posing, is that something that might continue? I think that's a leading question, but I think I know the answer to some.
Let me just say,
I'm anxious to hear from the department on what's going to happen after June 1st.
Yep.
And what their take is on that. I mean, long-term temporary, like jumbo shrimp, it doesn't necessarily always, a little bit of an oxymoron there. So it's hard to say. I mean, that's just the thing. Like, here's the thing around distance education. Yes, we are getting some institutions saying, hey, this is not so bad. Hey, we kind of actually like some components of it. Then go through and apply for a distance education approval. And I will tell you that bar, oh, you can't see that. That bar is over, it's high. The temporary approval was not, it was jumping over a crack is how high the bar was. So, but to actually get distance education approval, because, again, there are assessments before students even sign up for it. There are, trying to determine how successful they can be. Distance education, when it's, 100% distance education programs, they are notorious for having really low student retention, low graduation rates, They are hard to operate. They can take up as much time and energy and effort, if not more, than an in-class environment. So there are lots of long-term challenges that come with that. And it may be that we're in a bit of a honeymoon period now where people say, hey, this is not so bad, but you haven't been in it long enough to know the retention issues and the hand-holding and the technology issues and the other kinds of things that really hamper student success, drive up default rates, and it's not just a sweetheart deal. I mean, there's a lot that goes with it. So you've really got to be able to do it well. Will we continue to extend temporary approvals? If the department comes out and says that, that they're interested in allowing accreditors to continue to do that, then certainly ACCSC will try and do their best to act in concert with that. But I can't really say beyond that, this is going to be something that will open up without some kind of further evaluation and assessment at a much deeper level. If we've got to get into this for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months, we have to figure out some way to make sure that the quality piece isn't suffering in any way through this kind of rush to get online.
Right. Let me just say with the asset that we do have, the commission has approved expedited, streamlined IDL program approval process for institutions that are currently offering on a temporary basis. That said, reiterate what Michael just said, which is that absolutely there'll be the same rigor in terms of IDL standards and policies, because we're very aware of the past where you had no funding for distance learning or for correspondence training, for example, because of the poor student outcomes. In terms of innovative approaches, I think this COVID-19 has really awakened everyone to the fact that there needs to be innovation. And so right now, ASSET has a task force that is working on competency-based education standards. But again, that won't be a temporary flexibility. That will be an option for alternative approaches to education that schools can apply to offer.
Two questions. Go ahead. Who's that, Gary or Tony?
Yeah, it's Gary.
Hi, Gary.
We've had, I think, 350 or 60 schools that we've approved temporarily for distance. And, the whole tenor of the letter from the department didn't include the rigor that you might expect before the crisis for approving distance education. And it was just an emergency Band-Aid effort, to make sure that students got the most education they could during this crisis. And it's just like developing a vaccine. People keep saying, well, when are we going to have a vaccine? When are we going to have a vaccine? Well, nobody knows. And so, we can speculate all day long when we might go back full time, or if there'll be a second wave of the virus. And so it's not like, it's like waiting for a storm. You don't know. All you can do is look at the radar. Somebody made the comment that once that many schools are approved for distance that didn't want to do it before, they won't want to go back to the old process. And I would agree that when they do, they'll be going back, as far as I'm concerned, to square one. A new application, as much rigor. Now, obviously, they'll have some experience. They probably should get, as Diane said, they'll have some credit for doing distance, but, we don't know about the infrastructure that you have to have to do it. We don't know the rigor they've been using. All we know is that they had a temporary approval, and But I would expect they would, there would be some experience and credit given for it, but it would basically be going back to square one. And, not all programs, I think this is still true. I think it's still true that not all programs are designed and appropriate for distance.
Right.
So I'm wondering if some of what's been done, we wouldn't have normally thought about approving certain things before the crisis. So maybe that's a little too philosophical, but that's sort of my thinking right now.
Well, thank you, Gary. And I don't think that's too philosophical at all. I think that it's relevant to, again, the continuation of all the dialogue right now. Michael, you kind of gave a good segue to one of the next questions I had teed up, but for all of the group again, this is going to have an impact on outcomes measurements. What are institutions, what are the accreditors looking at? Are they looking at guidance from the department? Is there going to be any flexibility there because of the hardships that schools are experiencing right now, both from withdrawals as well as potential placements? That's not an easy one, I know. I noticed everybody was silent.
I'll just speak for Asset. So with annual reporting for completion and placement, the commission has allowed that in 2019, the calendar year 2019, that schools will be reporting on the first 3 quarters of the year and not the first. They'll have completion through the whole year, but for placement, it will only be the first 3 quarters, so that they weren't impacted by the COVID-19.
Is that something that we, the schools, or we, the community collectively, or me and other individuals that talk to people up on Capitol Hill, should be reminding them of? As would you all like additional guidance from the department and from Congress on how to have guardrails or have some flexibility there, or shut up and leave that alone to you guys and you've got it handled?
Leave it alone.
Okay.
Look, I'll just say, we addressed this on a webinar that we gave to our institutions as well. I mean, again, I don't know, but here's what I know is that it is unreasonable to use, the same data or the data that's coming out of this period as an evaluative tool for how the school was doing previous or even after that. So, I don't know who's asking the questions. I don't know if they're an ACCSC school. I mean, we've already kind of talked about this with our membership. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know if it, like to Judy's point, hey, we're not going to collect data on that period, or, we're going to throw it out, or we're going to try and, we had to do similar things around the 2008, 10, 12 recession, right? I mean, where we had to make some adjustments to employment rates because they dipped so significantly. So, again, I think that the regs give us enough flexibility there. I don't think we need to call any specific attention to it, because I don't want folks to feel like we're in any way kind of waiving things. We're still going to look at student achievement, but we're going to look at it in the context of the time frame, of the situation, of the what other indicia the institution can provide to demonstrate successful student achievement. It just doesn't have to be graduation rates and employment. Those are just a couple of measures amongst many that we look at with regard to all the inputs, competency assessment, being able to graduate from the program and achieve the objectives. Employment just tells us whether or not they had an opportunity to then take those competencies and move them out into the workforce. So it tells us something, but not the whole story. So I don't want to get ahead of it, but I just want to say again, there's going to be at least from our agency, and I would imagine from my peers, a significant reasonableness testing that will be applied in looking at this kind of stuff.
Well, and I think that's certainly the tone and tenor of what was there. And I embellished with regard to the question of, is there anything else that would be helpful? So, don't shoot the messenger and don't shoot the institutions, because they were just asking the more generic question. Another
Hey,
kind
Tom?
of generic question. Yes, Tony, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's Tony. Yeah, so our commission is getting together in the next couple of weeks, and I can say to our constituency that all of that's on the table. I mean, we plan on still requiring our institutions to provide us with the data that they have, good, bad, or indifferent. But then the commission will be looking at specific periods of time, and hopefully they will either waive it during that period of time, or we will still monitor their outcomes rates, but wouldn't necessarily consider them to be out of compliance under our disaster policy. There are a number of tools within our own toolbox that we could use, but I can say that we definitively will be taking that under consideration. As all of my colleagues have said, you know, a lot of this is beyond anyone's control, and so, you know, we're not in the business for putting schools out of business when it was beyond their control. I mean, our job, as with all my colleagues, I'm sure, is to ensure, you know, high educational standards that are reasonable and within their control. But this is obviously something that we have not dealt with in over 100 years. And so I can say, and it sounds to me like even my colleagues, that NACIS is not going to be unreasonable here when it comes to student outcomes and other outcome consideration, even financial, our reserves. There are a lot of things that are now on the table that we hope to have some answers by the end of May for our constituents.
Another common thread throughout the questions are with regard to reopening. And again, I think that relates back to seeing some states moving forward, other states kind of holding back, and other states still just undefined. I've seen several questions about, are the accreditors working towards guidance on reopening? It would have been a question I asked Diane from the department's perspective, because there were a number of them directed at the department. Any thoughts or any general discussion around reopening, and if there's going to be guidance provided by you all that I would assume talks about transitions potentially back from the short, long-term conversion to online versus transitioning back to bricks and mortar and things of that nature. Are you guys starting to talk about that within your various commissions or boards?
So again, this is Tony. So I can tell you that we absolutely are already in discussions internally among staff and also with the commission about allowing schools to both continue with the temporary distance education and allow for, under state law or from their governor or their state boards, allowing students back in the brick and mortar under a phase-in period. Again, we don't want to be the roadblock. We want to be part of the solution. Of course, we're hoping for is to make sure that this is within the federal guidelines for Title IV, and so I'm hoping they address that in the upcoming guidance letter by the end of the week.
Hey, Tom, I just
Yep.
want to jump in and add, just not to backtrack too much, but I feel like this is the next wave of questions that ABHES is starting to receive about outcomes and so forth. So I just want to touch on it. The commission has not yet formally discussed this, but I do think, given some things that we've had to deal with previously in another program field, I mean, I don't anticipate that there would be any kind of blanketed waiver of our 70% bright line, for example, when it comes to retention, which might be different than placement, which might be different from credentialing. So I feel like the commission, is definitely going to be discussing this. But I want to put, for any ABHES schools that are there and listening, is that, again, it's all about your documentation and what you are tracking and what information that you can provide about your students is going to play a role, because I don't think the commission is just going to say, oh, it's COVID-19, therefore we're going to erase or not track the information. I still think the burden is on the institution to continue to track the information, the reasons why students are dropping, the reasons why they're not passing or sitting and passing credentialing exams. The other point that I just wanted to make really briefly is I'm starting to get a lot of questions about this reopening as it pertains to distance education and this temporary approval. And so for ABHES, we've handled it maybe a little bit differently in that we very quickly did temporary approval for everybody who basically had a plan. Yeah, they're going online, it was required, the state pretty much mandated it and so forth. And so we put out a bulletin on April 6th that required schools, ABHES schools that want to continue their new distance education methods or expanded distance education methods to submit the appropriate application. And ABHES has 2 different apps. But by submitting those applications, it is going through our normal approval process. And when approval is granted, it is permanent approval. It goes on the record, and they can continue to offer those new and expanded distance education methods as they see fit, as they continue to demonstrate compliance with the standards. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Of course, if the department is going to adjust that June 1, it certainly is going to help us to give us a little bit more time to process these applications as we are working around the clock to get them done. But, you know, it is the formal application. It's not, you know, expedited. It's not for long-term temporary. It is the actual application. And we're learning a lot because, as you can imagine, schools very quickly overnight went to online. And those now that are having to complete these applications are learning that, you know, distance ed, there's a lot to it. There's a lot that's involved. And we're learning a lot about what they're doing and what that learning experience is for students. So I just wanted to throw those 2 out before you moved on.
No, thank you very much for that, India. I'm going to
Jerry.
Go ahead, Gary.
This will be quick. You know, back during the negotiated rulemaking and some of the calls and conferences and discussions before that, and I know Mike was on that group, but I heard Diane say once in a call, speaking of student outcomes, and she gave an illustration of the economy. We weren't thinking health back then, but she said, like in a specific town, maybe let's use oil refining as an example. If there's no demand for oil and you have 1,000 people that get laid off that worked in that business, obviously, you know, the economy would make a difference in student outcomes. And she was talking about having some flexibility in those calculations. So it seems like the same logic would carry with a pandemic as well as a normal economic bust.
Absolutely. Well, Gary, I think I'm going to let that be the last word, other than I hope you guys can all see the slide that says thank you from C-SPEN for all of your participation and for all of your sharing throughout the course of today's webinar. I've learned a lot, and again, while certainly the fundamental theme here was we don't have all the answer and there are no easy answers, the ability to have these type of discussions, the ability to continue to share information as we can get it and work with our colleagues across the department, the triad, and you all with accreditation in the states are all ways to share that information. And that's one of the things that we here at C-SPEN strive to do. Sincerely, the same way I meant it for Diane, I meant it to each one of you. Thank you for taking considerable times out of your day when I know you have so many other things to be doing, to share time with individuals. I hope you found value in it. I know that I can speak hopefully for the 489 individuals that were on the call that tapped out at 496. with a 501 ceiling, so we were right at the cusp. But I want to thank you on behalf of all of those individuals for sharing your time and sharing the information today. A lot of challenges still ahead, a lot certainly to be unknown, but we obviously now can look in the very near future for additional guidance from the department. We'll all get to assess that. We'll all probably have more questions following it, and we'll continue to go merrily through this dance together as a collective. One of the things I've talked about with several of the panelists individually is it certainly, as Gary said, is unprecedented, uncharted, unknown times that we're all living through and experiencing together. The good news is that this community is one that it's fun to be a part of because we do things together. So thank you for sharing time with us today. I will remind you we have another good, solid presentation coming up on Thursday where Joel English, former board member here with C-SPEN, and a group of institutions that remained open, some into their institutions and programs throughout the entire pandemic, and others went to the hybrid model or online, is going to talk about the 13 weeks of what that looked like to go through that process and what he forecast within his community for the next 13 weeks. So you don't want to miss that one because it'll get into some of the planning and prep for looking into when you reopen, as well as, again, probably an assessment from me of the information we get from the department. So Diane, India, Michelle, Tony, Gary, Michael, Judy, thank you very, very much. And I look forward to talking to all of you again soon. And for all of you that tuned in, thank you for your participation. We'll talk to you again soon as well. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.